Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my second guest collab of the preseason. We have a couple more weeks left until the live FPL launch, but I have the pleasure to be joined by Jian Batra. You probably would have read a thread or two from him on X or Twitter. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on one of the best YouTube channels out there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate it. And obviously what you're focused on a lot of the time is these threads, but a lot of them are based on sort of your viewings of the game. And you have quite, I think, solid opinions in terms of, whether you're willing to take risks at times, whether you're willing to go against the grain. But what I like about it is that you're not really disparaging other people's strategies. You just like going your way and sort of sticking through a certain strategy of choice, maybe a pick of choice that you've seen based on matches that you've watched, understandings of a manager. So how do you generally view your kind of FPL play style?
Yeah, for sure. I think I definitely view it more so from the eye test side of things. I've started to incorporate analytics a little bit more. So from Gameweek 30, I made a conscious effort to definitely bring that in because obviously we've seen the success it's had, right? And it's been brilliant for so many managers. But for me, I think the real upside lies with being able to get ahead of the curve, and you can only really truly do that through the eye test. That's basically where I try to get my edge.
Perfect. And what you have today is a guest draft, as we did
Yeah.
mention at the top. Let's probably pick out the most interesting thing of the draft. It's Sobo, right? He just scored in a preseason friendly yesterday. What do you think about him? And you were actually on Sobo before, obviously the goal was scored.
Yeah.
So talk to me about Sobo.
Yeah, sure. We'll start, I guess, with Liverpool as a whole to make it make sense. And obviously, you see the omission of Mohamed Salah here, so I'll probably touch on that a little bit. I think one, it's very difficult to go from Jurgen Klopp to pretty much anyone and expect the same standard of football. Sure, he had slight deficiencies in his last year where he potentially was like a little bit stubborn and he was very insistent on counter pressing to such a point whereby players fatigued and it's kind of difficult to keep up for the whole game. And he wouldn't really adjust tactically to the opponent's setup. Whereas Slot's probably a bit more considerate in that sense. However, he was such a good man manager that he probably got every ounce out of the players, right? And he was a special manager. You only need to look at Dortmund, right? They haven't won the league since he left, and it's been over a decade. So with that in mind, I'm not super confident that Slot can come in and instantly maintain that level or improve on it. So that's one thing. Second thing is, how does his system go from the Eredivisie to the Premier League? And these are all things that I think we have to take into consideration significantly because we are paying 12.5 for Salah. And then with Salah specifically, he's obviously a right winger, and at Feyenoord, the system was completely different to the one Jurgen Klopp used. Obviously, Klopp's wingers are penetrating the half spaces. They're making a lot of runs beyond the last line. They get a lot of the ball. The striker will drop in for them at times. Whereas in a slot system, they play a lot wider. It's a lot more combination focused as opposed to output focused, like especially in those wide areas. And thus, I think when you're paying 12.5 for an asset like that, if his output's going to be reduced, well, then you get in real big trouble because it's very difficult to forward him and Haaland. And so for me, I wanted inroads to Liverpool that wasn't Salah, and that was Szoboszlai. I think his tendencies really show and strengths really show that he is a number 10, but a slightly different one to most. For example, most are, I guess, what you call elite passers, right? Or at least back in the day, that's what they would be. Like your old David Silvas and Juan Matas, that's what you would think of as a 10. Whereas Szoboszlai probably more of a second striker as well as of a 10, simply because he's a great carrier who doesn't have a brilliant range of like penetrative passes compared to maybe like De Bruyne or someone. And then also he's got very good ball striking, and he's a good goal threat around the box. And thus I think Slot will use him essentially off the striker in a very advanced role. And if he is to do that, then I really like him as a pick because it's in Slot system. It's Szoboszlai. It's the 10 that really gets into those central pockets and advanced central pockets. Thus I think he could be really solid there.
Yeah, I had to say that is something that I'm looking forward to, but given sort of my approach, I probably tend to like to see something before I jump onto it. I totally recognize that that's probably the way to go. Because even when you look at some of the players at the club, like McAllister could conceivably play as a 10, but he's always much better in a pivot compared to, let's say, Sobo, who we saw in a pivot last season, and honestly wasn't very pretty, which I can imagine
Yeah.
someone like Salt will want to use the best attributes of Sobo in a better position, and balance the squad in that sort of way. I think that one thing to mention with the preseason friendly too is that was with Harvey Elliott, and I think Slot
Mm.
deliberately said that he was using twin tens. But it's very likely that we'll see, even when a striker comes in, that you'll see Sobo just behind a striker. And I'm very curious to see how that's going to look in the next preseason friendly, which I think is versus Arsenal. So we'll probably stay tuned to that. And I like to
Yeah,
see
for
if
sure.
Sobo stays on your draft. But Haaland, he's the player
Mhm.
effectively taking that position from Salah as the dominant captaincy within your draft. You're also playing on Haaland game week 1. So talk to me about that and in general how you see Haaland operates within your draft early doors.
Yeah, sure. So we'll start with the game week 1 aspect and the fact that he's playing Chelsea. Obviously, Enzo's system is very different to Poch's in the sense that, and he spoke about this, that he's very willing to build up from them back consistently. He is not shifting on that style, almost Deserby like, where he's very close-minded, not in a bad way. He's just going with his philosophy and that's it. And he said that we'll likely concede goals from that, right? Because it's a high-risk strategy. Then you have a side who are as good as Manchester City. Now, positionally, structurally, they're brilliant, right? They're probably one of the best sides on the planet, given they're drilled by a genius every day. So, in terms of being able to build up from the back and getting out, it's probably difficult against a side like City, disproportionately so, because they're so intelligent and they have all the right spaces covered. So, I wouldn't be surprised on like early turnovers high up the pitch if Haaland can profit from that. And then the other thing is they haven't really played in this type of system, and people are playing a little bit out of position. For example, let's say we go for an inverted fullback, right? Off the left, that's not Cucurella. Well, that's a pretty different thing for anyone who's going to be doing that. Reese, maybe if he inverts, that's a pretty different thing, and that's I'm pretty comfortable with Haaland game week 1. He's also had a good rest, and I think all of these type of things factor in. So that's that. And then in terms of going forward, like Ipswich game week 2 looks brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and there's no way I wouldn't want him for that. And going forward, I think the fixtures are just fine for him. Like I don't see any big hiccups. Like sure, they have Brentford in the first 4, right? And traditionally he struggles a little bit against them. But I imagine given these type of struggles and given they haven't recruited too much, Guardiola, as opposed to just spending a lot of money, is going to essentially iterate his system. And what I do think is going to happen is I think in the middle, as opposed to Foden carrying so much and Haaland almost being used as a decoy at time for like to leverage Foden's ball striking, I think we could see a more of a passer in that double 10 slot with De Bruyne, and the responsibility slightly evened out given he's a lot healthier. So I think all of the things basically point to Haaland having a really good season and a better one than last.
That's fair. And shifting on to the midfield, you've got probably what I'd call a sub premium. So that sort of territory of Saka, Son,
Mm.
Foden, even Palmer. You've gone with Son, who's probably the least popular option right now, but I don't think anyone is thinking that Son is someone to scoff at. He's got really good fixtures to start, especially those first 2 games. What are your plans with Son and sort of how does he operate in this draft?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. Son, it could either be him or Saka, right? So I'll touch a little bit on Saka and I guess my omission of Arsenal. If I was to get an Arsenal asset, I think I'll be going Kai Havertz, and he's actually someone I'd really like to somehow fit in. The reason being is one, is 2 million cheaper than Saka, right? Which is already an enormous deal. But the second thing is, I worry if Saka's output, especially his goal threat, could be slightly diminished by Havertz occupying the 9 role consistently. I think Havertz is probably one of those players where your eyes deceive you, similar to like Ozil and Kante, in the sense you see someone who has a lethargic running style, right? And that probably puts you off how much he actually works, how strong he is, how quick he is. And he's really like a box dominator. And I think early in the season, if he's going to get minutes there, assuming that Arsenal, continue with their brilliant levels of creativity, I think he could score a lot of goals. And with good expected minutes, that's the thing for me because he's a he works really hard off the ball and he's a presence in both boxes. And Arteta loves this. He loves having a really strong physical side. There's no real replacement to his 6'4" self up top, even if you put Jesus there, right? It's not the same. Thus, I think expected minutes wise, he's very good. He can also play in that left 8 if they want to bring on Jesus at 9 or Nketiah at 9 in the middle of the game. So for me, if I was going to go at Arsenal, I'd go Havertz. The reason for essentially fading them is I'm looking to be quite aggressive, and I think Son has the best fixture game week 1 with the highest ceiling. Like Spurs don't have the same spread of output that Arsenal do. And then I'm really eyeing up that Ipswich fixture in game week 2 to be very aggressive. And I quite like the look of De Bruyne in the first 4. So that's kind of my thinking of being really aggressive there and having Son and De Bruyne for 2 newly promoted sides in the first 2 weeks.
Kind of like that strategy. I guess the nice thing about Son too is, if you want to bank that transfer, he's still got a decent fixture himself. Nothing crazy, but still a home game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so some of the other picks that are pretty popular, Gordon, Eze, and Kunku. I don't think there's any big omissions here. I suppose it's, a very, very strong midfield what made you choose to spend a lot of the money into these picks? Maybe in absence of, maybe a third, let's say, defensive premium in the defensive position, as an example.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of like the overall squad structure, I'm pretty comfortable just having Konsa as at 4.5 rotating with Burn. And then with Stewart and Harder with Bellis, because I'm expecting somewhat decent expected minutes. I think worst case scenario, I play them, right? At least they both have attacking threat, even from the defensive standpoint, because he is good at getting down the wing and, with his volume of crosses. Like, that's one thing about Southampton. They have a huge volume of crosses. So there's a potential for these two to combine if they're both on the pitch at the same time. So I think overall, like, if I do get injuries and stuff, worst case, at least I have players that play. And then Eze is, as we spoke about on the reverse video when you came over to my channel, he is just at 7 million, arguably one of the best value picks in the game, if not the best value pick. And I see Nkunku in a similar light, to a lesser extent, but in a similar light. I mean, Eze's got penalties, goal threat, assist threat, and there's just so many good things about him. The fixtures I've warmed to. He's going to be involved, expected minutes, and everything kind of runs through him. It's very difficult for Palace to connect, to go from back to front without him being involved. Even if they go down the wings, by the time it comes centrally, he's always finding himself in those advanced spaces. So I'm very comfortable with him. Gordon is one that I'm getting a little bit cold on. I'm really not sure at how Newcastle start. I think one thing we saw last season is they had a lot of injuries, but their midfield is very rock and roll based, is what I would say. Like, obviously you've got Bruno playing at 6. That takes your main creative outlet and puts him further back. That's your 2/8s are really road runners essentially. Like, yeah, sure, they definitely have to have technical quality, but it's not to the same extent the likes of the other creatives in the top 6 who play at 8. And thus I wonder if maybe at times it's a little bit difficult for them to get up the pitch consistently. And like, it puts such a huge emphasis on Gordon and Isak. So I wonder if that trickles down just into the whole team's performance, and thus like maybe move somewhere else. Like, for example, go Gordon to a Havertz with a 0.5 upgrade, simply because I've also got Isak. So if they have some problems, right, I don't really want to be doubled up on them. And then Nkunku, I'm actually still open-minded about. I might get rid of him. It's very dependent on where he plays. So let's say he plays as an 8, I'm probably far more comfortable, because if he plays as an 8, I know he's going to be occupying those second striker like type positions way more often, right? Just playing off Jackson, given that would be the smartest thing to do to leverage his strengths. Plus, he's not really defensively minded. However, if he plays at left wing, given it's essentially a back three in the ball, which means no overlapping left back, so he has to hold space on the left. Caicedo's likely to be that left 8, almost guaranteed to be that left 8, so he doesn't have a passer next to him. Well, then you give him a huge amount of responsibility to fix everything on the left, and then that's definitely going to affect his output. So he's someone I'm very open-minded about. I know Enzo spoke about how he's versatile, but for me, I'd much rather him play sentry. So if I see him playing on the left in preseason, he's definitely someone I could relinquish and go for like a Morgan Gibbs White.
No, it's totally fair. And I guess with the triple Newcastle aspect, it's that game week 1 fixture is just incredible. So it can work both ways, where as long as you hit on that game, I think you already feel safe that they've delivered the job in terms of the value of the pick. But for example, within my own draft, I'm now considering if I would, let's say, want to extend some of the players up until maybe a game week 6 or even a game week 8. Do I really love the Newcastle players as much as to go, for a triple up or a double up? That's something I'm considering as well. What I do like about Gordon, though, is if Trippier leaves, and we've had a lot of rumors around him taking a flight maybe to Saudi, that Gordon's going to benefit a lot, right? Way more set pieces. I remember they did mess around with set pieces amongst a lot of the players for the team, but then by the end of the season, Howe was pretty clear in saying that Gordon would take all the set pieces, and I did see that, right? He took both sided corners and even indirect free kicks, and replacing that sort of value in the team is quite amazing, frankly. So I don't have Gordon in my drafts right now, but he's definitely someone I'd probably actually swerve back into, ironically, if that news comes to fruition by game week 1.
Yeah, another thing is I was doing a bit of reading yesterday, and I didn't know too much about Southampton before yesterday, at least. And I heard that for him, at least stylistically, it's quite a good fixture. They do leave a bit of space in behind just with the way they play, right? And then if you're going to get someone to exploit that, he's one of the better players in the league, and he did it so well last season. We saw in his home games, especially, where sides were willing to essentially not set up in a low block, and press to an extent and then be open to those type of transitions and balls in behind. And if he's going to do that against a newly promoted side and have those conditions, then that's where that fixture could get, especially at home, a little bit dangerous for non-owners. So that's definitely something I'm looking forward to. But yeah, as you can see with this draft in general, it's quite, I guess, attacking heavy and very upside heavy in the first few weeks, hoping that it just goes well and then essentially use the free transfers to get out of any holes if need be, because I'll be X amount of points up in an ideal world.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, what I like about the draft at the end of the day, it still has the picks that I find close to be non-negotiable within my own teams. Like at least one dominant captaincy option. Although I completely recognize that Nomian would work, but then Isak and Trent more specifically, I love them
Yeah.
a lot. Just when you have a good run of games, when you have things like penalties, amazing underlying data, and set pieces, of course, in Trent sort of situation, and I like that it actually is super well balanced, and part of that I suppose is the small compromise of having the rotating 4.5s.
Yeah.
Goalkeepers, Sanchez. I guess you're not really set on this. I mean, we know Chelsea might sign another goalkeeper. Who could that be if let's say you weren't so sure about that starting number one for Chelsea?
Yes, I'm definitely not sure on Sanchez. The other thing is, I think if we do sign Jorgensen, it would make most sense for them to price him at 5 million, right? Like, I don't think you can have a traditional top six side with a 4.5 keeper. I just don't think that makes sense given the way the pricing structure is. So that's what I expect to happen. And if it does happen, he basically becomes a non-option. I'm looking at Miguel from Forest. One of the reasons is I think you're only really looking to get one haul with, like, let's say in the first 3 games or 4 games. And if you do, then you're fine, right? Like, even if he doesn't keep a clean sheet in the rest, like, it would be a very healthy return. Thus, I think Forest have fixtures in the first 4 which are indicative of a potential haul. You've got fixtures which aren't like too easy. Even Southampton away in Game Week 2, right? The fact that it's away probably means that they concede a higher volume of shots. Thus, at least he can accumulate a higher volume of saves and therefore haul from that. So I think I'm looking at Miguel just given the structure of the fixtures. I don't really like anyone else's too much, and I think the category looks pretty weak as of now. But yeah, I'm looking at Miguel if he can nail down that number one spot.
No, I hear you, and to be fair, yeah, when I found out Miguel's height, I was pleasantly surprised.
I don't
Um,
actually know how tall is
I
he.
think he's 6'8", which yeah, high amongst all the other keepers in the league. Not that that really translates to anything in particular for goalkeeping, but just a fun little aside point. So that is the draft. Do you have any ideas in terms of wildcard windows, or is the idea really just to have a strong, stable squad? Because I mean, let's be honest, this draft can last itself up until a game week 6, game week 8 quite easily. These are all picks that I would say are very stable, very permanent. So yeah, any thoughts about that, generally speaking?
Yeah, sure. So I've probably got the blinders on a little bit at the moment to attack the first few weeks, and thus this squad isn't really structured to optimize a certain wildcard window. But I'll definitely consider 6. I like the fact that it's not super early, but also not super late, and I think that's probably where you can get the maximum utility out of it, given it's like one of the first big fixture swings, if it's not, you know, the whole. One of the reasons I set this draft up in this structure is to have 2 premiums in Trent and Guardiola. I think right now they're comfortably the best 2 assets in the game, defensively speaking, right? And thus, with that in mind, I at least have a safety net of where Haaland and Isak probably don't need to change too much. Guardiola and Trent don't need to change too much. Son, like, it's not the worst thing in the world to get stuck with a premium asset if I do. So then I can kind of just move around the 4 midfielders with free transfers, assuming injury wise I'm okay. And with that in mind, given I won't need to change Burn and Conte for a while as well, I'm at least open to, wildcard 6, but also maybe potentially down the line and trying to go for a different route to everyone else and just using free transfers to navigate as essentially to banking them and rolling, just, using them aggressively week by week, given I've got at least, I guess, what you could call like 5 heavy hitters in place already.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess going back to it too, we tend to associate that wildcard 6 swing with Arsenal, and that probably is the
Yeah.
only thing that's missing in this draft. Not that it even really makes a difference, because I tend to always say, as long as you have someone in replacement who would hopefully achieve a similar amount of points or more, then it doesn't really matter what players you're picking from whatever team. And I myself, I think right now don't have an Arsenal player in my draft, so that's why tentatively I'm sort of thinking wildcard 6. But yeah, I think I'm generally in the same camp. You could spend only a few transfers with this team because a lot of these players are nailed regardless, and it really comes down to if there's something significant like a Haaland injury that would probably prompt me to smash the wildcard button, because that's such a big structural change that I'd rather pocket free transfers in that situation. But I love the draft. Any maybe closing thoughts on where the draft could go and anything we might have untouched?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one thing we didn't touch on too much is maybe like Trent and Guardiola, as opposed to the fact that they're the best assets. Like why? Obviously, we had a change to the bonus structure this season, and it means that you said a very similar point on my channel that essentially the gap between the premium defenders and the rest has increased because you get -4 for every goal conceded. Thus, you're really looking at accumulating the highest volume of clean sheets possible to even enter into bonus territory, which is significant, right, compared to midfielders and attackers. And these two guys also have attacking returns. So at least when they get the clean sheets, their attacking returns are still feasible in terms of their likelihoods, and thus they can compete with the guys in midfield who are scoring. But not only are they scoring, they're now getting shots on target, which is rewarded. They're getting fouled, like Gordon gets fouled a lot. So they'll be rewarded in that sense. So for me, like keeping them and not messing around with it too much makes a lot of sense because over the long term, I think you're going to be well paid out, and I think you only get one free transfer a week, right? You've got enough headaches, I think, within your front line, which is where the real, I guess, optimization value is at. And just leaving your back line and letting these guys trickle along if people don't have them could be really, really useful because it's very difficult to get back, right? Like if you've got problems in your midfield and there's two premiums or there's no Haaland, it's much harder to acquire them and at the same time sort out the defense. So for me, I think if I'm going to have one issue, I'd rather have it in midfield and attack as opposed to the defense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you've got balance in all positions, right? Because if just by owning someone like Son, you can pivot around those picks in around those price points. If you own Trent or Guardiola, they can always be an Arsenal defender later down the line. If you own Haaland, I mean, you can get to anywhere that you really want. Like if you really want to get to Watkins in game week 4, you can go there if you want. And that's what I quite like about starting off a draft structure that's well rounded in every sort of position. And goalkeepers, it really comes down to your own sort of personal, I think, attachment to spending a lot of money on goalkeepers. Some people like spending a bit more money. I think Andy, in his first draft, he's someone who doesn't like spending a goalkeeper transfer at all. Even though goalkeeper injuries are rare, they can still happen. But I'm also tentatively sort of on the path where, yeah, if I spend 9.5 million on a goalkeeper, I think I'd still be pretty happy as long as I can squeeze as much money for my outfield. Particularly, I think, given that we're Haaland owners for now, and that makes a huge difference because you do need to be wary of that sort of 2.5 million difference with Salah and just be wise about the sort of budget you're spending.
Yeah, I think the one thing with this draft though is it's got 4 mid-price midfielders, and it could go really ugly if it's a turnout of the premiums and
Yeah.
the mid-price don't really live up to expectations, similar to the defensive category, but maybe even to a greater extent. And that's, I think, is key for me to nail the mid price. I think Eze's super safe, and even Gordon's pretty safe. But Szoboszlai and Nkunku, where people are going to have completely different spots and arguably even multiple premiums there in the form of like Salah, Saka, Palmer. I think it's really important that I get this 2 times 6.5 slots right. Otherwise, I might be in a little bit of trouble.
No, I hear you, but I mean, every draft needs to have some compromises, which is, I
Yeah,
think,
that's true.
the beauty of the pricing this season. Because I'm looking at a lot of drafts, and I'm sort of slowly coming to the conclusion that I don't think that we have a dominant template at all, which is very nice.
Yeah, I think it's the best start to a season before one's actually started in terms of the game structure probably we've ever seen. I think they've done such a brilliant job in the sense that it's such an open field and it's going to be very punishing. Like you look at this draft and you look at yours, they're very different in a lot of areas. There could easily be like 40-point swing within 2 weeks. And that's not just between mine and yours, that's across the board.
Yeah.
And I think given the game will be really punishing, you'll see huge swings, and thus it's really good for content because some will do really well, some will do really bad. It will open the mind to a lot of ideas. You can create a new type of content, but also you can play a completely different game. You can play super attacking and have huge rewards. You can play stable, and it can still go either way. And that's why I think this will probably be the best FPL season we've had in a long, long time from a enjoyment standpoint, especially if you can do well.
Nah, that's lovely to hear. So I think that's it for the video. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any closing thoughts in general?
No, it was an absolute pleasure coming on. Like I said, I love your work, and I think everyone should certainly subscribe to you.
No, but I mean, Jian Batra also has his own channel, so do feel free to give it a look, give it a subscribe. I've also done a video as a collaboration, so feel free to have a look at that. It sort of details a little bit about my play style, and how it sort of blends against maybe his, and has my also sort of updated draft for now. So feel free to have a look, and thank you guys so much.